and today we're going to be talking about my top 10 books of 2024. And so I'm probably going to sound like the rest of BookTube when I say that 2024 was not a good reading year for me. I didn't hit my reading goal, and it was a struggle for me to find 10 books that I was just really passionate to talk about, but I still just wanted to get 10 books together. And so I would say my number 1 through 4 are books that I'm just like, whoa, that's my jam, okay? That's for me. But 10 through 5 are things that I did really enjoy, and I just tried to pick things that were memorable to me. But let's just go ahead and get into it. So book number 10 is Trust of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. And so this was my introduction into Brandon Sanderson. I wasn't sure what to expect, but this world definitely felt really magical. The tone was really special. There was a narrator in the back that just made this actually kind of comical as well. So we're following a character named Tress who she is trying to find like the love of her life. He went on this sailing quest. His dad sent him off, and so Tress kind of sneaks away onto another ship to try and find him and save him. So she goes on this adventure. She finds friends on the boat. I'm not gonna lie, there's a talking rat in here. And I don't fear a lot in life, but rats is definitely one of them. So initially I was like, whoa, what is this? I know it's a fantasy, but this is also my worst nightmare. But I'm glad that I finally got into Brandon Sanderson this year, and so I would definitely continue to pick up works by him. And I actually read this as part of a video project that I usually do at the beginning of each year, which is reading BookTube's favorites of the previous year. And this book actually came from that, so thank y'all. And then book number 9 is one that has been on my shelves for a very long time. I feel like all of BookTube has probably heard of it by now, and I feel like it's just kind of made its rounds. And it's one of those books that even though it's a backlist book, people still tend to pick it up, and that is Tender is the Flesh. And this book is about a world where animal product and animal meat isn't good to eat, so they start breeding human beings as a meat product. And this was a lot deeper than I thought it was going to be. I was like, oh, they're just going to be hanging up people and just eating them, you know, which is not inaccurate. But this book also talks a lot about grief, and if you're someone that is squeamish at all, this is not for you. Okay, it is a literary horror, and the horror is definitely there. But if this is something that you've heard about a few times and something that continues to be on your TBR, and you clearly know what it's about, then I would say pick it up. I think you might be pleasantly surprised, because I know that I was. And book number 8 is one that sometimes I pick up books just based on this premise sounds like it is right up my alley. It sounds like something I've read before, or just something that if I wrote a book, that's what I would want to write, and that is Chain Gang All-Stars. And so this is about a society where people who are imprisoned, they've been in jail for doing these heinous crimes, they end up signing up for this television program where they essentially fight to the death, and you have to make it through this experience for 3 full years before you're able to free yourself. And this clearly has a lot of parallels to today's criminal system, and I feel like it's kind of heavy-handed in the way that it does it, but I still really enjoyed it. I ended up learning a lot about like the history of some of the laws that are in the US, because there is footnotes in here that reference actual US laws that just blew my mind. I mean, the US does not surprise me in a lot of things, but I was still very disappointed to know like how some of the laws were written and how some of the laws were created and came to. But the entire story, what it was trying to say, the premise of it in general is one that just really still sticks with me, and so that's why it is number 8 on this list. And number 7 is a book that I'm surprised more people didn't like, because this author has had a very famous romance in the past, and that is A Love Song for Ricky Wilde by Tia Williams. And so this book follows a girl named Ricky, who she is part of a family that's kind of already well off, but she decides she wants to do her own thing and open up a flower shop and do it without like the help and support of her family. And she is in Harlem, and she ends up connecting with this guy, and there's kind of this like magical air about their connection and about him, and he always just kind of like randomly pops up into places. There's a little bit of magic that's thrown into here, and I just really enjoyed it. I think Tia Williams writes romances that, even though this wasn't necessarily realistic, the love and the relationship dynamic felt realistic to me, and that's one thing that I just really enjoy about her writing. And the fact that it was set in Harlem just really did something to me, because I did live in Harlem for about 4 years. So when she was describing some of the settings and some of the streets and stuff, I could picture myself there, and for me it just really added something really special to the book and to my reading experience personally. And so that's why it's ended up at number 7 on my list. And number 6 is a book that surprised me. I don't own it physically, and that is Sociopath by Patrick Gagne. But I think I really enjoyed this because I am someone who likes to look into true crime, and my interest in true crime really comes from a few things. One is how people cope with traumatic events. 2, how people's brains work and kind of like what leads up to them committing these like heinous acts. And so Sociopath really kind of gave me an insight into what a sociopath feels and their impulses a little bit. And I feel like this book does a good job of humanizing sociopaths. And I want to make sure that I'm being clear, not people that have mass murdered, killed a bunch of people. No, that's not what we're talking about here. But there are a lot of people who have sociopathy that aren't violent, that, you know, don't commit crimes, but they do have these impulses and urges. Just hearing and listening to Patrick's experience growing up, her just trying to navigate life as she's realizing she is a little different. Other people are realizing that she's different and that she doesn't really have any empathy. It was just a really interesting read, and it just really surprised me. And so book number 5, I really did enjoy this, and while it didn't hit like my top 4, it definitely hit for me. And it's a book that I recommend to people, and it's one that I still think about. And that is The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. And so this is also a book that I read as part of my Reading Booktubers favorites. So like hit after hit, you know, for y'all. But this book is about a woman who goes to a writing retreat, but while she's there, one of the ladies that's also on the retreat ends up dying. And so we're kind of in this mystery, locked room mystery, trying to figure out who killed her, why. And at the end of this book, things get crazy. Things get wild. And I joked and I told someone that the ending reminded me of a Law and Order SVU episode. Like, it was just completely outlandish, but I'm learning about myself that when it comes to thrillers, I love stuff that doesn't actually make a lot of sense. I don't know why I'm like that, but this book was just absurd at the end, and I just absolutely loved it. And I think it's just because it entertained me all the way through. If you're in a reading slump, if you just want a good mystery thriller just to keep up the pace, to, you know, just get you going again when it comes to reading, I definitely recommend The Writing Retreat. Okay, so we are already at my top 4 books of the year, and even just looking at how I ordered these top 4, I'm indecisive about it, but I think it's because I just loved all of these so much. So just know that on any given day, any of these top 4 could be my favorite of 2024, okay? But in number 4 right now, we have I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. And so me and Mr. Jones, we go together real bad. I feel like Stephen Graham Jones at this point is just one of my favorite authors ever. And I feel like the narrative of this book is just so special. So we follow a young boy in the 90s, and he's living in Texas. And we learn how he becomes a teenage slasher. And so there's that kind of horror element. But we also follow him as he's committing these slasher acts. So if you think about a slasher movie, think about you being in the head of the person that's doing all of the slashing. But it's interesting because even though this is a teenage slasher, it's still so clearly about not fitting in when you were younger and just adolescence and growing up. And I just feel like the way that he was able to combine this quintessential like horror genre and this 90s nostalgic vibe while also being able to talk about being human and growing up and being a teenager and not being able to fit in. so good. And I know a lot of people had mixed reviews about this one, and I can understand why. I think if you read this purely in a physical sense, you may not have gotten the same thing out of it if you listen to it on audio, because I listened to it on audio. And I am a native Texan. And so the audiobook narrator also needs to win some type of award, because just the voice and the accent was able to transport me into the 90s of Texas. Like, I knew exactly where kind of in Texas this was taking place just from the accent, and I could kind of picture the setting and all of that. You know the book You by Caroline Kepnes, and how that book is so iconic because of how it was written and the narrative you're getting. I feel the same way about I Was a Teenage Slasher. Like, this book is just so special. I've never read anything like this, and I was like, this may actually be my new favorite Stephen Graham Jones book. I've only read 3 or 4 things by him, but I think I'm gonna have to do a deep dive in 2025, because this man has done no wrong for me yet. Okay, and then book number 3 is actually a book that I read in my last vlog. So if you haven't seen that, go watch that for more detailed synopsis and my thoughts on it. But it is How High We Go in the Dark. And this is a sci-fi book that follows multiple POVs, and all of the POVs are anchored in this idea that there is a plague, and the POVs kind of span different times of the plague. So for example, one POV follows the man who discovers the plague. There is another one where there's a young boy working at a amusement park where kids go on a ride to kind of move on to their next stage very gently, because all of the hospitals are overrun, all of the care centers are overrun, and their parents want them to pass on peacefully. There's also one POV where people are leaving Earth and trying to find a new place to live because they don't think they're going to be able to survive the plague. And so they're trying to find a new home for humans. And so all of these POVs end up being connected. This was one of those books where I just felt like this was exactly what I needed in the moment. It was exactly the type of book that I like. Even though it was sci-fi, it still had this very human element to it, right? And it makes you think about humanity in general. This is one that I think is going to stick with me for a very long time. And I'm sure you guys will see this in some type of other recommendation video or something in the future. But if you haven't read this yet, you're definitely missing out. And the number 2 book on this list, I'm so proud of myself for even picking it up, because I'm someone who is intimidated by chunky and fat books, okay? Fat with a PH. And that's exactly what Rage of Dragons is, okay? She's thick. But I'm so glad that I picked this up, and surprisingly, I was actually able to get through it pretty fast, which should tell you a lot about how much I enjoyed this book. So this is a very layered book. So the best way for me to give you a synopsis is that there is this people of Omehi, and they are in a war, and we follow Tao as he is trying to train for this war, and he really starts to train after an incident happens, and he is on this quest for revenge. And Tao is one of my favorite protagonists ever, because I feel like a lot of protagonists in fantasy, they are relying on something that was just kind of handed to them to get to where they have to go. Tao is almost like a normal human being, a normal, regular guy that actually didn't really want to be in the situation that he was put in, but because he has this quest for revenge, he really goes for it. He works to get what he wants and works to get where he's at. And there's also like a school or training facility in this book that I also really enjoyed. And surprisingly, this book has a lot of fighting in it, but I think it really speaks to Evan Winter's writing style and his ability to move the story forward through fighting, through these battle scenes. The story is still able to move forward and to progress, which I thought was just really special, because I think if anybody else were to do this, I would have gotten bored. I would have put the book down. I would have been like, okay, that's enough fighting. Okay, be a lover, not a fighter. Put the sword down. But I was also surprised that, like, yes, there are dragons in here, but not to the extent that I was expecting. So if you are expecting going to this book like dragons, you're gonna be a little disappointed. But I'm so happy that I read this, and I will definitely be picking up the sequel in 2025. And then the number 1 book on my top 10 list. When I tell y'all, y'all really knocked it out of the park for me reading BookTube's favorite books of 2023. You really knocked it out of the park. Like, the beginning of the year, I didn't realize that that was going to be the climax of my reading year, but it was, because my #1 book also came from that video, and it's Monstrilio. So Monstrilio is a literary horror where this woman is really grief-stricken when her young son dies. So grief-stricken to the point that she ends up cutting out a piece of his lung to kind of fulfill this old folk tale of, like, if you cut out a piece of their body and you feed it, it'll grow into a creature, and that's exactly what happened. We follow a few POVs in this book as well. So we follow his mom, his dad, a family member, I believe, and we also get the POV of Monstrilio. Monstrilio's POV wrecked me just a bit. I never thought that a literary horror book and that a POV from a monster would make me cry, but it did. This book tackles grief in such an interesting way that, like, what lengths would you go to try and combat your grief? But then also seeing Monstrilio's point of view and how he was struggling in his own form of grief. This book is so special. And the fact that this is a debut work from this author is insane. But don't get it twisted. While it was beautifully written, it's still a horror book. Okay, the descriptions that were written in here had me gagging within like the first 20 pages of the book. I was like, well, my stomach hurts. But I think because it was offset by the beautiful writing and the themes, I just absolutely loved this. So that is my top 10 for 2024. And you know, I'm so glad I did this video because I feel like I was so ho-hum, woe is me, thinking about, oh, I don't have 10 books to pick from that I didn't really like. I didn't have a good reading year. But as I was talking about those, my excitement for them really just got like reinvigorated, and I really did enjoy all 10 of those books. So if you made it to the end of this video, let me know down below what was your favorite book of 2024, and give me one goal of yours for 2025, or leave a book stack emoji down below. And you are my absolute favorite, my little tater tot, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.